I think the orthodoxy has always been that the top clubs employ the top managers.
They said modern football has no patience anymore, that big clubs have stopped gambling on ideas and now only trust proven names. So when José Mourinho looked at the game and said, people who have done nothing are getting the biggest jobs, it sounded like a warning.
Quando allenatori senza storia, allenatori senza lavoro fatto, hanno la possibilità di allenare le squadre più importanti al mondo. Questo per me.
A reminder that history still matters, that experience still rules. But what if that argument collapses the moment you actually look closer?
In order to manage big clubs, to know what a big club feels like, you needed to have managed previous ones, to have won, to have been given opportunities to be successful in other environments, to land yourself in a big job.
What's Michael Carrick doing there?
Because while pundits questioned coaches with no history, Manchester United quietly turned back to something they'd abandoned for years, their core.
Dorgu, Fernandes, again. Patrick Dorgu! Oh, he has hit a belter!
No revolution, no tactical circus, just structure, balance and football that made sense again. Since stepping in, Michael Carrick has already taken down the league's number 1 and number 2, restored midfield control that had been missing for seasons and stabilised a squad many thought was beyond fixing. And this isn't guesswork. We've seen this pattern before, at Real Madrid, at Barcelona, at Chelsea. Under pressure, the most dangerous thing in football isn't inexperience, it's misunderstanding who you are. Now comes the real question, the one that separates bounce from brilliance. Can Carrick do the easy part? Can he break down low blocks, sustain dominance, and turn clarity into consistency? This is why Mourinho was wrong, why Carrick was always a better fit than people realised, and why Manchester United's future might hinge on something far simpler than anyone expected. José Mourinho didn't say Michael Carrick in the sentence that lit this debate up. He didn't need to, because when Mourinho stands in front of the cameras at Benfica and questions why the biggest clubs keep appointing coaches he believes have no history, no body of work, everyone knows what he's pointing at. A modern trend, a modern risk, and in this moment, a very specific appointment.
Who do you think he could be referring to? Is he looking at Manchester United? What's Michael Carrick doing there?
On the surface, it's classic Mourinho, meritocracy first. If you want the biggest dressing rooms, the biggest scrutiny, the biggest pressure cooker in European football, you should arrive with receipts. A trail of results that proves you can survive when everything turns hostile. And honestly, that argument hits because modern football is now a high-stakes investment machine. Clubs don't just buy players anymore, they buy plans. They gamble hundreds of millions on recruitment, wage structure, project signings, long contracts, and then hand the steering wheel to a manager whose proof sometimes is a reputation, a trend, or one good season in a smaller context. So Mourinho's quote doesn't land like a random opinion, it lands like a challenge. Because what he's really saying is big club management has become a position people get, not a level people earn. And that implies 3 deeper things, 3 uncomfortable ideas that matter for this Carrick conversation. Mourinho's framing suggests the role has been devalued, that the badge is so powerful now and the machine is so rich that clubs think the job can carry the coach, instead of the coach carrying the job. It's a subtle insult, not just to managers, but to the clubs doing the hiring. Because the subtext is brutal. If you hire like this, you're not serious. This is where the quote becomes dangerous because it sounds logical, until you test it against reality. When Mourinho says no history, he's basically arguing that understanding a club's culture, the psychology of the dressing room, the demands of the crowd, the weight of the badge, isn't enough. What matters is what you've already done somewhere else. But football keeps showing the opposite. When a giant club loses its way, the fastest fix is often identity, not invention. Not always, not forever, but in crisis, in drift, in confusion. The quickest stabilizer can be someone who knows what the club is supposed to look like when it's healthy. That's why return to core appointments aren't just romantic decisions. They can be strategic ones. Because in moments of chaos, clubs don't just need tactics. They need belief, alignment, and standards. And we have clean examples that prove this isn't theory. Start with Real Madrid in 2016. The club was restless, cycling through managers, searching for something they couldn't quite name. They didn't need a tactical innovator. They needed someone who understood what Real Madrid looked like when everything was working. Real Madrid didn't appoint Zinedine Zidane because he had a decade of elite coaching behind him. They appointed him because they needed someone who could restore authority instantly, someone the club would listen to on day one, not after 6 months of persuasion. And what happened next is one of the most extreme identity hire payoffs the modern game has ever produced. Zidane won the Champions League 3 consecutive times as Real Madrid coach. That's the point. Madrid didn't discover a new philosophy. They didn't reinvent football. They returned to what Real Madrid has always been at its peak. Big game mentality, dressing room control, calm under pressure, and the ruthless ability to win when the margins shrink and the temperature rises. Zidane didn't need to teach Real Madrid what Real Madrid was. He already knew. And Mourinho's quote doesn't account for that advantage. Now move forward a few years. Barcelona were facing a different kind of crisis, not just results, but identity itself. The club had drifted so far from its roots that even the fans weren't sure what Barcelona football meant anymore. Barcelona's return to Xavi wasn't a fairy tale, it was emergency surgery. He walked into a club dealing with instability on and off the pitch. A team that didn't just look inconsistent, it looked unsure of itself. Unsure of what Barcelona football even meant anymore. And here's why Xavi matters to this Carrick argument. Xavi didn't take over a smooth machine. He took over a club that had lost confidence in its own style, and he recentered it. The outcomes were not vague or sentimental, they were measurable. In his first full season, Barcelona won La Liga, and they added a domestic trophy on top. So the DNA hire didn't just improve vibes, it delivered silverware. And that's the key distinction. Not perfect football, not perfection, but clarity, restored. Then there's the example closer to home, one that people get wrong because they let the ending rewrite the beginning. Lampard's first Chelsea stint is the most misunderstood of the three because people remember the second spell and let it rewrite history. But the first spell had a clear context. Chelsea were restricted in the market. The squad was in transition, and the club had to lean on what it already had. So Lampard did the only thing that made sense. He leaned into the academy pathway, backed young players, and created a team that could compete immediately. That season produced real development stories, not marketing stories, and it still ended with Chelsea qualifying for the Champions League. Again, not flawless, not a tactical masterpiece, but a functional success built around understanding the club's reality. Put these 3 stories side by side and a pattern jumps out. Zidane succeeds because he understands Madrid pressure and winning culture. Xavi succeeds because he restores Barcelona identity when it's drifting. Lampard's first stint succeeds because he leans into Chelsea's internal pipeline under constraint. These aren't coaches with nothing. They're coaches whose biggest qualification is that they understand what the club becomes when it is at its best, and they know how to reactivate it. And that's exactly why Mourinho's no history framing can mislead you, because sometimes the most valuable history isn't the one on the manager's CV. It's the history inside the club, the identity, the standards, the muscle memory that the right person can switch back on. And once you understand that, you can finally ask the real question this debate is hiding. If Carrick is core identity, then what happens when you actually look at his body of work instead of his reputation? If Mourinho's argument is the biggest jobs should go to people with a body of work, then we have to be honest about what counts as a body of work. Because Michael Carrick's story isn't legend gets a chance. It's coach has already done this under pressure, in real environments, with real consequences. And the proof starts in the most unforgiving place possible, a collapsing Manchester United, and then a full rebuild job in the Championship. Carrick's first spell in charge wasn't a soft landing. It was United in crisis, with the dressing room brittle and the calendar giving him no time to build anything. So what did he do? He didn't chase perfection, he chased control. His first match came on the 23rd of November 2021, away at Villarreal in the Champions League. This wasn't just a win, it was a qualification win. United's late goals, Cristiano Ronaldo and Jadon Sancho, secured the result that put them into the Champions League last 16. But what made it Carrick's first? Receipt wasn't the scoreline, it was the management of the moment. He didn't arrive trying to make a statement. He simplified the structure, kept the game alive, and trusted that a calmer United would eventually get chances. And when the first goal went in, the second followed because Villarreal had to open up. That's a theme with Carrick. Reduce chaos first, then build on the platform. 5 days later, on the 28th of November, United travelled to Stamford Bridge to face Chelsea, who were league leaders at the time. The stadium was hostile. United were fragile. So Carrick did something most brave managers refuse to do. He played the game that actually fit the moment. United sat in, defended compactly, and waited for the one mistake that would give them oxygen. And it came. Sancho punished a Jorginho error, and Chelsea had to chase the match. The most revealing detail here is the shot profile. Chelsea had 24 attempts to United's 3. That is not an accident. That is a deliberate survival plan executed correctly. Chelsea equalised through Jorginho's penalty. But the point stood. Carrick had taken a team in turmoil and walked out of the league leaders' stadium with something. That match is a Carrick fingerprint. Risk management. Not pretty, not loud, but grown up. Then came the 2nd of December, and the story goes almost poetic. Carrick's final game as caretaker ended with a 3-2 win against Arsenal at Old Trafford, with Ronaldo scoring twice, including the decisive penalty. So the caretaker record becomes clean, factual, and impossible to talk around. 3 matches, 2 wins, 1 draw, unbeaten. And then comes the detail that tells you a lot about who Carrick is. He didn't cling to power, he stepped away. Manchester United confirmed Carrick chose to step down as first-team coach and leave the club after that Arsenal match. So even his first senior spell wasn't built on ego. It was built on responsibility. Do the job, stabilise the ship, then step aside. That's not nothing. That's a coach showing he can handle heat. If you want proof of Carrick as a manager, not a caretaker, you go to Teesside. Middlesbrough appointed Carrick on the 24th of October 2022. He walked into a table that didn't flatter them. 21st, 1 point above the relegation zone. And the turnaround wasn't gradual. It was violent. A benchmark that keeps coming up in analysis of Carrick's start, 40 points from his first 17 games. The kind of run that doesn't happen because the mood improved. By the end of the 2022-23 season, Middlesbrough finished 4th and reached the playoff semi-finals, losing to Coventry. That season also gives you a player development headline you can state without guessing. Chuba Akpom scored 28 championship goals in 2022-23, with broadcast analysts tracking every single one of those goals from that campaign. That output matters because it speaks to coaching impact in the most honest way. Not slogans, production. Whether you call it unlocking Akpom or building a system that fed him chances, the point is the same. The numbers exploded inside Carrick's structure. And to keep the analysis credible, you also acknowledge what happened next. Carrick didn't coast upward forever. Borough dropped to 8th, then 10th, and the club eventually moved on. Major outlets reported his departure after missing promotion. That nuance is important. It proves we're not doing propaganda. We're measuring a real managerial spell. Peaks, limits, and the lessons. Here's where Mourinho's no-history framing starts to look careless. Because Carrick doesn't just have results, he has a repeatable structure. Multiple tactical breakdowns of his work at Middlesbrough highlight a consistent base, usually a 4-2-3-1, built around improved spacing, cleaner build-up, and a more stable double pivot. And this isn't once in a while. One detailed analysis of his Borough tenure notes that across almost 3 seasons, his side started in 4-2-3-1 in 112 of 124 championship matches. That's not improvisation. That's a model. Even the broader career arc is coaching-specific, not celebrity-specific. Carrick's Borough reached an EFL Cup semi-final for the first time in 20 years in his second season, which tells you he wasn't a one-season flash. So when Mourinho says people who have done nothing, here's the problem. Carrick has already won a Champions League away game that helped seal last 16 qualification. Taken a point at Stamford Bridge with a deliberate survival plan, Chelsea 24 shots to United's 3, delivered an unbeaten caretaker record, 2 wins, 1 draw, taken Middlesbrough from 21st to a 4th place finish, and playoff semis, overseen a striker hitting 28 league goals in his system, built a consistent tactical base, 4-2-3-1 used across the vast majority of league matches. That's not no history. That's a body of work, with pressure, with receipts, and with a clear football identity. And now, once you accept Carrick has the evidence, the next chapter becomes unavoidable. If clubs like Madrid, Barca, and even Chelsea have succeeded by returning to their core, then what happens when Manchester United finally do it? And Carrick comes back a second time, not as a caretaker experiment, but as the stabiliser they've been missing. On the 13th of January 2026, United announced Carrick as head coach until the end of the 2025-26 season. Not a one-week caretaker patch, Not a let's see, a real appointment with real responsibility. And almost immediately the appointment started to collide head-on with Mourinho's argument, because within days Carrick delivered the kind of results that don't just lift morale, they rewrite the conversation. Carrick's first league statement wasn't against a mid-table team at Old Trafford, it was the derby on the 17th of January, and United won 2-0 against Manchester City. Then came the one that really snapped heads around. 8 days later, on the 25th of January, United travelled to the Emirates and beat league leaders Arsenal 3-2, with goals from Brian Mbeumo, Patrick Dorgu and Matthias Cunha, sealing one of the most significant away wins of United's recent years. Broadcast coverage framed it as a winning start as head coach and noted it was United's first league win away to Arsenal since December 2017, the kind of stat that tells you this wasn't just a nice afternoon, it was a psychological line being crossed. So now you have the key tension of this whole story. Mourinho is saying, coaches with no history, people who have done nothing, shouldn't be getting these jobs. But Carrick's second appointment at United immediately produces the thing big club football respects most: elite results under elite pressure in elite stadiums. And that's why Mourinho's quote lands in the most sensitive place possible: the clash between paper credentials, what your CV says before you arrive, and club clarity, what happens when the job fits you like a glove. It wasn't just what Mourinho said, it was who was saying it and from where. He's making this argument as Benfica manager, a post he took in September 2025, meaning he's speaking from a seat where pressure is constant and results define your credibility every week. So when Mourinho says he's surprised that unproven coaches are being handed giant jobs, it lands with authority, because Mourinho has lived that world at the highest level. But here's the turning point of our story. If Mourinho's argument is that the elite job should only go to managers who've done something, then the next question is brutally simple: what counts as something? Because the moment you lay out Carrick's actual record, not vibes, not nostalgia, not United legend mythology, the no body of work label starts to fall apart. And these early 2026 wins are part of that evidence, not separate from it. They show why United's decision wasn't a romantic one. It was a fit decision. Simplify the team, restore structure, stop the self-sabotage, and give players roles that make sense. Even tactical breakdowns immediately picked up on that. Carrick's United leaned into clearer spacing and role clarity in the Arsenal win. Not chaos, not improvisation. So this is the moment Mourinho's quote stops sounding like wisdom and starts sounding like a misread. Because if your definition of history can't recognize what Carrick has already done and what he's doing right now, then maybe the problem isn't modern football. Maybe it's the lens you're using to judge it. Michael Carrick has already passed the part most managers fail. He's walked into elite stadiums against elite opponents under elite pressure and come out with results. City beaten, Arsenal beaten, authority restored faster than anyone expected. But football doesn't judge managers by the nights that make headlines. It judges them by the weeks that don't. Now comes the part Mourinho understands better than anyone, the part that decides careers. Can Carrick turn clarity into consistency? Can he break down deep blocks, manage expectation, rotate without losing control, and win the matches United are supposed to win? Because the hardest thing at a giant club isn't upsetting the favourites, it's sustaining dominance when everyone sits back and waits for you to make a mistake. This is where the debate truly ends. If Carrick solves that problem, Mourinho's quote won't just feel harsh, it'll feel outdated. Because United won't be led by a coach with no history. They'll be led by one who understood the club well enough to build his own.